This podcast is brought to you by Contessa Digital.
Have you ever been a victim of someone playing the Oppression Olympics? Because I have. A few months ago, I was having a conversation with 5 other women, and we were talking about relationships. We were talking about, the good relationships we've had in our lives, the bad ones. And as far as the bad ones go, what were the patterns that we saw? What were the triggers? What are the patterns that we found ourselves repeating? And, I talked in this group about my struggles, how they led me to become a dating coach, and how, I became a coach because I wanted to be the woman that I so badly needed when I was at my lowest point, right? When I was in a terrible relationship and going through a quarter-life crisis and feeling like everything I tried was useless. The situation I was in was hopeless. Generally, my life was hopeless. I wanted to be the woman who would have come into that situation and picked me up and encouraged me and pushed me to go on. I had to be that woman for myself. And I didn't want that for other women. I wanted other women to have someone so that they wouldn't have to do it by themselves. Like, yes, at the end of the day, your stuff is your stuff, and you have to heal from it. You have to do the work, but it's so much easier with help, right? It is so much easier when you have support. And I was explaining these things. I was being really vulnerable and sharing my heart and my struggles. And someone in this group brought up the fact that I was the only woman in the group who grew up in a 2-parent household. And because I grew up in a 2-parent household, because I had my father around, there's absolutely no way I could have struggles that amount to anything close to what they had. That there's no way that I could have, quote unquote, daddy issues, right? And first of all, I understand that a comment like that comes from a place of pain. But at the same time, I think it's important to recognize how much pain you can possibly be inflicting on someone else when you say things like that. You don't know another person's struggles. And just because someone has what it seems like you want, that doesn't mean that they don't struggle on the inside, right? And the more I coach, the more I meet people, the more I recognize this, right? The more I see examples of someone who seems to have it all in one way, but when you get to know them, they're lacking in another way. So, the most beautiful woman in the world can still struggle with self-esteem issues, or someone could have their family life great. They're surrounded by love, but they're struggling with their finances. Or, as someone who has dealt with in the past a chronic illness, I know all about invisible disabilities, right? People who have some type of health handicap that you can't easily see, so therefore you assume that they're perfectly healthy. We never know what people's struggles are, and playing the Oppression Olympics and telling people that they don't have a right to feel bad because their bad can't possibly be as bad as your bad, it's just wrong. We're supposed to support each other and love each other. And especially in a group of women, like that is what sisterhood is supposed to be about. But more importantly, I want to let you know that we all have daddy issues. Every single one of us. We all have mommy issues as well. Because even if you grew up with the best childhood, even if you had both your parents around, you were at least stable, if not, wealthy, you had a decent childhood, there wasn't a lot of bullying or trauma or any of that, you're still going to have issues. And you're going to have those issues because you weren't raised by perfect people, because no one is perfect. So even for people who have had it good, your parents still had their faults because they're human. And one or two or more of those faults triggered you. And those faults could still be leading to you to this day having unhealthy patterns in certain relationships and not quite understanding why. This is one of the things that I help my clients with, is identifying the unhealthy relationship patterns, figuring out where they came from, and then working to heal those. I can think even of example of, I had decent parents. I grew up in a 2-parent home. My dad's a minister. Both my parents worked hard. So this is not a bashing session, right? But, I can think of my parents really, really being sticklers for punctuality. Being early to something was on time. Being on time was late. And being late was just not an option. And because of that, they would get very frustrated, both of them, if you were slowing around, falling behind, all of that, which is understandable. But at the same time, as a kid, I was kind of a sickly kid, and I dealt with, chronic illness and all of that stuff. So there were legit times where, I was in danger of making my family late. And by late, I mean on time, and as opposed to early, because I wasn't feeling well. That was taking me longer to, get ready. And I remember not even really thinking about this, like not thinking it was a big deal, not even really registering, just being like, oh, okay, my parents are like big on time, until being in a relationship where we were supposed to go someplace and, we were running for real late and me just kind of like breaking down and crying. And the guy I was dating at the time being like, what the heck is wrong with you? And, this is kind of a light example, but it's just things like this that oftentimes, until a certain situation happens, we don't realize what a trigger that was. I grew up with a lot of perfectionism and people pleasing tendencies. Always wanting to do the right thing, always wanting to achieve, always wanting to do things that my parents could brag about, and just wanting to be like the perfect child, right? And, in my case, the perfect preacher's daughter. So it wasn't until this whole late incident that all of these things like kind of came together to, my parents' frustration, to wanting to be a perfectionist, being with someone I cared about, the person I was dating at the time, and not wanting to feel like a complete failure if it was my fault that we were 5 minutes late to something. So I point this out again because until you allow yourself to be okay with the fact that you're not perfect, until you allow yourself to put away the guilt of, I can't complain about this because I didn't have it that bad, or I can't complain about this because Yeah, my parents were messed up, but they tried their hardest. I can't complain about this because there's people who have it worse than me. Until you get over these things and you're finally at a point where you're like, this happened, this is a problem, and I need to fix this. I need to do better so that I can pass along better to the next generation, so that I can be happier in myself, so that I can break a generational curse. And, FYI, for those of you who don't want to have children, even if breaking the generational curse means that you broke it in yourself and that ends it for a family line, that's good enough. But until you reach that point where you're okay with acknowledging and accepting and being willing to, you know, correctly pinpoint where these things came from. I don't want to say blame your parents, but it's important to acknowledge because it starts with knowing like this is where the root of it is. And then as an adult, you take accountability for fixing it yourself. Like, it would have been great if in the first 18 years of your life, your parents had fixed it and didn't pass that thing down to you. But they did. And, it is what it is. Again, you're not perfect. So if you do have children, there will be certain things that you pass to them that they will have to work through as adults. But our goal is that each generation gets stronger, each generation gets better, right? Not perfect, but better. So being able to have this acceptance of yourself, and maybe in my case, stay away from people who want to play the oppression Olympics. It's the start of what can become a beautiful healing journey. It is the start of feeling empowered, being able to handle your triggers from a place of power and not helplessness. And it is part of this radical acceptance that you need of yourself in order to truly succeed in life. I'm a dating coach and I talk so much about love and loving others, having someone love you, be attracted to you. But you don't get those things without loving yourself first. You get those things when you learn that the love that you give to others needs to come out of the overflow of the love that you have for yourself. It is when you have that love for yourself that you stop tolerating BS, that you stop tolerating bad relationships, that you set boundaries and enforce them. It is when you don't love yourself that you have a hard time setting boundaries. You have a hard time upholding your standards. You put up with bad behavior because you don't think that you're worthy of being treated well. So, all this talk on social media about soft life and princess treatment and all that, you have to believe that you're a princess to get princess treatment. You have to believe that you're worthy of those things that you desire. Because if you don't, people pick up on that. You teach people how to love you. And if you go around in the world showing people that you don't treat yourself with love, that you don't really love yourself, you teach people that they don't really need to love you either. And again, that starts with understanding that we all have daddy issues. We all have mommy issues. We all have relationship issues because none of us were perfect and none of us were raised by perfect people. So what I would encourage you to do is take some time, look at your early caregivers, your biological parents, your adoptive parents, your guardians, whoever raised you, right? Look at, again, even if for some of you, this is going to be easier because some of you can immediately pinpoint things that were wrong with your childhood, right? For some of you, it might be a little bit more difficult to make this list because you may start out with absolutely nothing was wrong with how I grew up. And I promise you, if you dig, you'll find some things. So start with that. Look at the way that you were raised and even look at it from the perspective of, okay, if I had a child, what would I do differently? So don't even put it on my parents were bad because of such and such, right? Because I find that's difficult for women. I find that when we start talking about faults in other people who are close to us that we love, we start automatically trying to justify it. Like, yeah, they did this, that was bad, but such as, yeah, they did this, that was a terrible thing, but it's not their fault. So just remember, we're not assigning fault. We're just saying what could have been done differently to another hypothetical child, right? And once you start with that, then start looking at these behaviors that I saw, these things that I didn't think that were that great. How do they affect my life today? And now that you're an adult, it's time for you to parent yourself. It's time to treat the inner you, the child version of you, the way that you wish you had been treated when you were a child. I wish, back to that whole being white thing, I wish a little bit more grace had been given in those cases. And I get it because, when you have a child who is going through things and you don't really know what they are, because the whole chronic illness thing, I wasn't diagnosed until I was an adult. So, it's understandable. You might think your kid is faking it to get out of school or church or whatever, right? So it's not always that people do things with ill intentions, but if it affects you, then it still has that effect on you, and you still need to work through those things. So start there and work with the generational curses that you would like to break. Recognize how those are affecting you now, and then come up with a plan to be different, to do different, to influence people in a different way. And remember that you are allowed to have your triggers. You are allowed to grieve certain aspects of your childhood. You are allowed to wish certain things had been better. You are allowed to mourn what you didn't get. But you're also allowed to push forward and to do better and to be better. So let me know what generational curses you're breaking in your family. I'd love to hear it. I'm on social media at Keshia Rice, KESHIARICE, on TikTok, on Instagram, and on YouTube. And until the next time, love you. Bye. Hey there. So you made it all the way to the end of the episode, which means I have two things to say. One, thank you so much. I truly appreciate it. And two, you like me. You really like me. So I would appreciate it if you would show that like by subscribing to this podcast so that more people can hear about it and enjoy it as much as you do. And if you want to know more about any of the links that I mentioned on this episode or any guests that I've had, be sure to go to KeshiaRice.com/links. That's KeshiaRice.com/links. I can't wait to talk to you again in the next episode. So see you then.